Did you ever stop and wonder if you could be related to everyone with your last name?
Just think if you're a Lincoln, how you'd be congratulated if Honest Abe were someone you could claim.
To clear up any mystery, just check your family history.
Genealogy's the name of the game. Now some ancestors you'll find you want to hide,
but most of them will fill your heart with pride.
Oh, your family tree, your family tree. Check your genealogy, find who was who and how who came to be. On your family, 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 family tree.
Welcome to the Genealogy Radio Show, the radio show that's keeping you in the loop. And this week's show is all about workhouses and the case study of Donaghmore in County Laois. And we have Ailbhe Maddock, who recently visited the workhouse to tell us all about it. And she has also researched it as well. So welcome, Ailbhe, to the Genealogy Radio Show. And you had a good time, a good visit at Donaghmore, County Laois.
Yeah, I did. It was very interesting, it was.
Okay. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about why we're looking at the workhouses, because we had over 2 million people in starvation situations in the year 1800, and it was identified that there was a problem with the poor in the 19th century Ireland. Workhouses are a source for many of our ancestors. So Ailbhe, tell us a little bit about the workhouses.
So a workhouse is basically a public institution in which the destitute of a parish received board and lodging in return for work. So an institution would have been an asylum, hospital, school, prison, and workhouses date back to as far back as the Poor Law Act of 1388, which would have been around the Black Death in England. So the workhouses were originally seen in England, but since the famine, the numerous famines in Ireland, since they thought it worked out well in England, they brought the workhouses over to Ireland. So this was introduced to kind of to house the poor of Ireland and the starving since the famine.
And there's a great source for this. Ask About Ireland have got the records for Carlow and George Nichols, who was the man who thought it was a great idea to emulate the workhouses in England. And those records are freely available on the Ask About Ireland site. And you get to know what the idea was of building the workhouse and so on. So there are plenty of sources to help people work out what is going on. And you visited an exact workhouse, Ailbhe. Tell us a little bit about that.
So for my co-op workplace in Moloney, I went to Donaghmore Union Workhouse, which is literally 5 kilometres outside my house. So so I went there anyway, and I was greeted by Trevor Stanley, who's the co-founder of the museum there, and he gave me a tour of the workhouse. So a little bit of background. The workhouse first opened its doors in 1853, which makes it a post-famine workhouse. Now, there's a big difference between a pre-famine workhouse and a post-famine workhouse. The pre-famine, so obviously they were before the famine and during the famine. So, but there's actually a difference. You can notice a difference in style of the pre and post. The pre-famine workhouses, you've noticed they're designed as more, they've kind of pointed windows, kind of
like Gothic architecture.
Yeah, sort of.
And for our dates, 1845 would mark the commencement of the famine.
Yeah.
So workhouses in Ireland started to be built in 1838. So pre-famine workhouses would go from that period, 1838 to 1845.
Exactly. So the post workhouses then they had more of a basic kind of structure to them. They were basically built 2-story, 3-story, kind of your normal roof, kind of ceiling, whatever building. So Donaghmore went there anyway, and I was brought into the boys' sleeping dormitory. So there I was showed the small classroom. Now, I actually I never realised that they would have had classrooms in the workhouses. So when I saw that there, I was kind of like, oh, this is right. So I went there, but I noticed we were in there. Yes, there was a fireplace and all, but the fire wasn't actually to heat up the room. That was basically just to heat up the headmaster. They didn't really didn't treat the children as well as they did the headmaster. And another thing I noticed as well, that all the rooms are whitewashed, every single one. And that's because of the lime they used was to kind of keep disease at bay. So in the sleeping dormitory and the classroom, I noticed that the windows facing the front of the workhouse are 6 foot off the ground. So the children couldn't look out to the front. They could only look out to their own courtyard, which was all separated because they couldn't mix with the older adults.
And that could be members of their own family.
Exactly.
Because families were segregated the minute they entered the workhouse. So children under 2 were left with their mothers, but over 2 they were separated from their parents and put to a nursery. You would get to meet your parents or your siblings maybe at one day on a brief time on Sunday, maybe. That's not the case in every workhouse. I would know that to be the case from the excellent tour we got in Portumna last year. So Donaghmore would reflect that also.
So from the classroom, I was brought to the sleeping dormitory, and I noticed that the original staircase is still there to this day, and you can see the woodworm and like everything there, but still sturdy. You can still walk on it. It just shows how well built they were, that they're still lasting to this day. So got to the boys' dormitory, and I noticed that once you're in, there's 2 passageways, and at each side there is raised floorboards, and this is where they slept. No beds, no bunk beds, none of this, just flat floorboards. And I noticed that underneath the floorboards there were small vents, and this would have allowed for circulation. Again, keep the room cool to avoid disease spreading, and because you can't imagine how this room would have been on a hot summer day. All these people shoved into the one room, it would have been an ideal place for disease. So after this, I was right beside the boys' dormitory. There was the Headmaster Study, and his study was placed right beside the boys' sleeping dormitory, so he could keep an eye on them, so there'd be no, messing or whatsoever. And here he would have done his work, and he had his own place in there. Like, he would have stayed there with his family. He would have been paid to stay there. So of course he got the best of best, and his original stairs are there, and you notice that on his stairs you could see where he had carpet in the middle of his stairs, and you could see where it was kind of stained from the carpet. And downstairs on his part, you could still see he had his very own kitchen, which you notice the difference that it's all cobbled. And again, the windows are actually 6 foot off the ground as well, because they would have had inmates from the workhouse in the kitchen preparing food. And again, while they were working, so they couldn't get distracted. They couldn't look out. So in a way, never realised, but the workhouse was very psychological for the people working there. Like, they kind of, wouldn't have tortured them, but kind of...
They were divorced from the outside world.
That's what I'm saying, yes. So...
They dreaded it. They dreaded even inmates that workhouses that were turned and converted into hospitals and homes later on. The old people dreaded the workhouses because it was one of the worst things that could happen to you was to end up in the workhouse and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. So, again, in the same building, now I have to remember that the boys' building, the girls' building, and the women and men, they had their own building, all separated, had their own courtyard. They never mixed, as Lorna said, on a Sunday maybe, but that was very, very rare. So, on the same side of the building, there was also a small, is known as a punishment room. So this would have been, again, it was a very small room, very secluded, because if one of the boys or anyone was misbehaving in any way, they would have brought there, and they would have been bet by a belt, cane, those typical ways of back then. This is how they told the children off. So, and to kind of, in a way to make them be sorry for what they did, they were made kind of do extra work to help the headmaster or whatever. So they would light his fires for him in his study, or they would clean the floorboards and scrub for hours, literally. You can still see how smooth the floorboards are, not from people walking, literally constantly being scrubbed all day, every day.
And was there, did they produce things from their work, or was the work needless, or?
The work was basically for themselves. There was nothing produced out of the workhouse to be sold or whatever. They literally worked for themselves just so they could live there. They couldn't be seen not to work. So, it was either the workhouse or what, starve at home.
Or asylum.
Exactly, yeah.
So this is the growth of institutions in 19th century Ireland, and it reflects a pattern that is happening all over the world as well. So 5 times more people will be in an institution at the end of the 19th century than what were there in the beginning of the 19th century. And the records, the Board of Guardians, which would be voted in, they would keep minute books, and these minute books have some treasures in as well. And I know you have found some sources for some workhouses. And what's the story with Donaghmore Workhouse?
Now, with Donaghmore Workhouse, the Board of Guardians, there's only 6 of the books out of 30 something that were originally made that have been found, and you can see them in Laois County Council Library. Now, on these books, there's no actual names of people who entered the workhouse, but rather numbers of people who entered, gave birth, died. There's just numbers, literally no names. But in Dublin, there are resources where you can find names of people who went to workhouses in Dublin.
And there's a subscription site, Find My Past, which has a listing of those for the Dublin freely available. Well, it's available online, but that's subscription. But in the Ask About Ireland site, you have a lot of information on the Carlow workhouse as well. So it is something that the libraries and the local studies in libraries, and if you know your terms, Board of Guardians, minute books for Board of Guardians, outdoor relief, indoor relief, these are all the terms that you wouldn't associate with a workhouse, but that are going to be the key that unlocks the door to these records for you. Especially if you know your great-grandfather, you will know that he died in the workhouse, because if you have a death cert of irishgenealogy.ie, it will tell you that he died in the workhouse. Mm. So you can then track back, well, what workhouse was that? What was that like? And so on. Well, how will you know which workhouse? Well, the poor law unions were based on the electoral divisions, which divided up into the townlands. And that's where the construction of the workhouse is very important. So you can work out, well, if I have an ancestor who died in the workhouse in Donaghmore, how will I know it's that one? Well, number one, how many workhouses were County Laois? The fact that Donaghmore is such a wonderful project and survives and is open to the visitors all year round.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And thank you very much to Donaghmore Workhouse for giving Ailbhe the opportunity to visit. And I know you found it extremely rewarding.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
You know, so people can visit and get the guided tour like you did?
Yep, they're currently open from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday, with the exception of bank holidays. But if you're hoping to visit outside of these hours, just give them a ring. On their website, they have numbers and they have an email. So their website is www.donaghmoremuseum.ie. You can find out every piece of information about the workhouse, times, about anything, contact, all on the website there.
And who showed you around?
Trevor Stanley.
And he's very instrumental in the project.
Yeah.
These are the key people to get involved with when you're looking for your ancestral research and so on for this particular area, because there is a graveyard actually.
Yeah, it's behind the infirmary.
And you had some interesting things to note about that.
Yeah. So what I noticed was there's no headstones. Again, the people, they didn't really care about the names of the people that died in the workhouse. You know, if they died, so what? That was basically their attitude. You know, so they were buried in a mass grave at the back of the infirmary, which was in the workhouse. And I've noticed that there was a fence separating it. They're not sure why, but they suspect that it was Catholics to the back and Protestants to the front, or children to the front and adults to the back, or maybe a bit of both. But there is a memorial headstone there, so that's basically all we know about the graveyard, to be honest. There's not much else because all they know is numbers of deaths there. But
and another thing about the workhouses, the workhouse changes according to what's happening in the 19th century. So, for example, by the end of the 19th century, there's a strong emphasis on cleanliness being next to godliness. And so laundry work is extremely important and becomes key to work in the workhouse.
Yeah. So
everything is washed of a Monday, regardless of whether it's dirty or not. It's taken again and washed.
As you walk into the workhouse, the left-hand side there's a small building, and that was known as the laundry. So,
yes. Yeah. And that would be hand washing through and so on. So the machinery that you have would be very different to the modern machinery that you have today. We will be putting together a blog on this and putting together our sources for the research for the show today. And thank you very much to Donaghmore to giving us this opportunity. And that's in County Laois. And how would you get there, Ailbhe, if you were travelling?
Literally, it's about an hour from Limerick, about an hour and a half from Dublin. So you come off the motorway at the Burstnossery exit, and literally 5 minutes off the exit, it's right there on the main road. You can't miss it. Like, and it's signposted. Well
signposted, yeah. And well worth a visit if you're travelling around Ireland, and do contact them, because they do wonderful guided tours, and it's an excellent resource. Any of these real testaments to our past are vital in understanding the context and to clarify your family history. I know a lot of people are very enthusiastic about putting a tree together, but the documents that support that tree are equally as important, and how people lived and died, what they ate, what they wore, where they lived, how they lived, are equally as important for the contextual side of things. So just to recap, we looked at the poor laws happening from the 14th century, the workhouses being introduced, built on an English model, which didn't necessarily work to solve an Irish problem of destitution. It was in response to emigration, rapid immigration from Ireland to England following the famines of the 1820s and so on, and transport improving as well, so that people could actually get from England to Ireland and then maybe hop over to America as well. So the country was under severe distress and stress at the time, and that gave rise to the reaction of the workhouse. Very interesting interview with Ailbhe Maddock here, who's on placement with Merriman Research, and we would welcome your queries at irishroots@clansandsurnames.com. Show is podcast out on Sunday, and we air it out live today. So thank you very much for listening.
Did you ever stop and wonder if you could be related to everyone with your last name?
Just think if you're a Lincoln, how you'd be congratulated if Honest Abe were someone you could claim.
To clear up any mystery, just check your family history.
Genealogy's the name of the game. Now some ancestors you'll find you want to hide,
but most of them will fill your heart with pride.
Oh, your family tree, your family tree. Check your genealogy, find who was who and how who came to be. On your family tree.